Imagine waking up one morning in 2025 and realizing the world you thought you understood just quietly ended overnight. No explosions, no announcements, no warning, just a silent shift of power. And here's the unsettling truth. The richest people on the planet believe that moment is coming soon. Not in 2030, not in some distant future, but in the next 12 to 80 months. While the news tells you everything is fine, private bankers, family offices, hedge fund insiders, and billionaire advisors are quietly preparing for a correction so big, they don't even call it a crash, they call it a reset. And the signs of this reset aren't hiding. They're sitting in plain sight for anyone brave enough to look. Start with the most obvious signal. Billionaires are hoarding cash at a level we haven't seen since 2007. Not investing, not expanding, hoarding. Why? Because when you expect the system to break, cash becomes a weapon, and that's exactly how they're treating it. But it goes deeper. Look at what wealthy families are buying right now: agricultural land, water rights, precious metals, art, secure real estate. These aren't random purchases. They are the exact same assets that protected Europe's old aristocracy during the financial collapses of 1873, 1914, 1930, and 1971. And the numbers today match those historical patterns almost perfectly. But here's where things get strange. For the first time in decades, billionaires aren't preparing for one collapse, they're preparing for two happening simultaneously. The first collapse is financial, the second collapse is political, and they believe both collide in 2025. That's why they're moving money in ways that normal people never see. They're shifting assets out of markets and into private vaults, private equity, private credit, private everything. In other words, they're leaving the public financial system before the public even realizes there's something to leave. But what exactly are they preparing for? To understand that, you have to look at the timeline. In 2020, governments printed more money in 18 months than they had printed in the previous 100 years combined. When you print that much money that fast, there's only one possible outcome: inflation. But inflation wasn't the real danger. The real danger was the response to inflation. Interest rates were pushed higher and higher to stop the damage, but those higher rates crushed everything that had been built on cheap debt: banks, real estate, commercial property, startups, tech companies, small businesses, even entire governments. We've been in a slow-motion collapse since 2022, but slow-motion collapses eventually speed up. The rich know that. They know every major financial reset started the same way: slow, quiet, then suddenly all at once. The panic of 1907, the 1929 crash, the collapse of Bretton Woods in 1971, the savings and loan crisis, the dot-com bubble, the 2008 meltdown. Right now, all the indicators are flashing at the same time. Bond markets are behaving exactly like they did before. 2008 commercial real estate is collapsing faster than it did before 2008. National debt is rising faster than it did before 1971, and consumer credit is exploding faster than it did before 1929. But the billionaires aren't reacting to history, they're reacting to what happens after history. They believe this reset will change how money works, how power works, how nations work. They believe that by 2026, the financial system will look nothing like it does today. That's why private meetings are happening quietly. Meetings between hedge fund elites and central bankers, between tech billionaires and former intelligence officials, between political donors and the people who actually write the economic rules. And what's being discussed in these meetings is not how to survive a crash, it's how to reshape the system after the crash. Because money doesn't disappear, it transfers. Wealth doesn't vanish, it moves. And the rich are positioning themselves to be on the receiving end of the greatest transfer of wealth since the Great Depression. Here's the proof. For the first time ever, US billionaires are buying farmland in states they have never shown interest in before. Kansas, Missouri, Iowa. Why buy land in the middle of nowhere? Because land is power, food is power, water is power. But the weirdest purchase of all: private energy sources. Generators, microgrids, small nuclear partnerships, battery reserves. They're preparing for a world where the lights don't always stay on. And if that sounds dramatic, remember this: before every financial reset in history, elites prepared years in advance while the public kept living normally until the very last moment. Before the 2008 crash, insiders pulled money out of mortgage securities months before the news reported anything. Before the 1971 gold shock, central banks quietly bought gold for 2 straight years. Before the Great Depression, the wealthy liquidated stocks quietly in the summer of 1929. Before Bretton Woods collapsed, France emptied America's gold reserves behind the scenes. History doesn't repeat, it whispers. And right now, it's screaming. But here's the biggest clue of all. Billionaires are accelerating their second passports. You don't buy a second citizenship unless you believe the place you currently live might not be stable in the near future. And they aren't just buying passports in random countries. They're buying them in countries that historically survive. Global collapses: Switzerland, New Zealand, Singapore, Portugal. These aren't vacation destinations. These are financial bunkers. But the real question is this: what exactly happens in 2025? Why that year? Why that moment? What are they seeing that the rest of the world isn't? The answer is simple, but terrifying. 2025 is the year when many crises collide at the same time: debt, inflation, recession, political chaos, geopolitical conflict, currency instability, election aftershocks. It's the perfect storm. And that storm creates something economists call a structural reset, when the system breaks so badly that the only solution is to rebuild it from scratch. And if you think that sounds impossible, ask yourself this: did you ever expect the world to lock down in 2020? Did you ever expect banks to collapse in 2023? Did you ever expect inflation to hit 40-year highs? Everything unthinkable has already happened. Now imagine what comes next. And the rich already But here's what almost nobody realizes: the rich aren't just preparing for a financial reset. They're preparing to benefit from it. Because resets don't ruin everyone. They create new kings. And billionaires are positioning themselves to be on the winning side of a crisis that could wipe out entire generations of middle-class wealth. Start with the most surprising move: they're dumping us bonds. For decades, the safest place on earth for the wealthy to store cash was U.S. Treasury debt. Today, billionaires are quietly selling it off. Why? Because America's debt is rising so fast that even the world's richest families believe the system can't handle it anymore. And here's the part no politician will ever say publicly: the U.S. is reaching a point where paying the debt might become impossible, when interest payments cost more than the military, more than healthcare, more than education. That's not a warning sign. That's the end of a cycle. And what happens when a global empire reaches that point? Look at history. Britain 1949. Their empire ended not because of war, but because they couldn't pay their bills. The Roman Empire collapsed when maintaining their system cost more than the system produced. The Soviet Union collapsed not from ideology but from math. Every empire falls the same way, slowly and then all at once. That's why billionaires aren't waiting. They're shifting their money out of US government debt and into something far older, far scarier and far more powerful commodities. Oil, gas, crops, metals, copper, lithium. These are the assets that control civilizations. These are the things countries go to war for. And buying them before a reset is like buying land before a gold rush. But the rich aren't stopping there. They're buying influence. If you look closely at political donations in 2024 and 2023, something strange happened. For the first time in modern history, billionaire donors funded both sides of major political battles. Why would you fund opposing teams? Because you're not trying to elect a leader. You're trying to shape the rules a leader will follow. They're preparing for a future where laws change fast, where tax codes shift, where currencies reset, where property values collapse, where the government needs to rewrite the rules overnight, and billionaires want those rules written in their favor. But the most disturbing shift of all is happening off the public books. Behind closed doors, wealthy families are converting digital wealth into physical control. For decades, the elite lived in digital wealth: stocks, portfolios, derivatives, tech, equity, crypto, financial instruments. Today, they're converting digital assets into physical ones: land, metals, infrastructure, because physical assets survive resets. Digital assets often don't. Think about it. If a bank freezes withdrawals, your digital money means nothing. If inflation spikes, your dollars lose value instantly. If the market crashes, your portfolio melts. But farmland keeps producing, water keeps flowing, gold stays gold. Control of energy becomes control of survival. And the rich know that 2025 isn't just a financial reset, it's a resource reset. That's why they're building private energy systems. That's why they're buying land with natural aquifers. That's why they're developing private airstrips, private security, private supply chains. Not because they expect the world to end, but because they expect the world to reorganize. And reorganizations always create chaos. But the craziest sign of all is what the rich are telling their children. In private family office meetings, advisors are telling elite families to train the next generation in one of three skills: political maneuvering, resource control, or global mobility. Not marketing, not tech, not crypto, not innovation. Power, control, adaptability. Because the rich believe that 2025-2026 marks the beginning of a new 40-year economic cycle, one where power no longer comes from tech companies or markets, but from whoever controls the foundations of civilization. But here's the question nobody asks: what exactly triggers the reset? The answer is simple: cracks that have already formed. The first crack: inflation didn't stop. It slowed, but it didn't stop. That's a sign that the system is damaged, not recovering. The second crack: interest rates can't stay this high without breaking the system. Something has to give. Either inflation comes back, or markets collapse. The third crack: global de-dollarization is accelerating. China, Russia, Brazil, the Middle East major economies are quietly doing deals outside the US dollar that's never happened at this scale before. And here's the truth. Empires don't collapse when enemies attack. Empires collapse when their currency loses influence. And billionaires know that a currency reset is coming. They don't know the exact day. They don't know the exact hour. But they know the pattern. Every major financial reset happens after three signals. The dominant currency begins weakening. Governments inflate the money supply. And the public has no idea what any of it means. That's exactly where we are right now. But here's what makes the 2025 to 2026 reset different. For the first time, technology allows the government to replace the currency instantly. Central bank digital currencies, digital dollar prototypes, real-time programmable money. The richest families are preparing for a world where your money could be turned on or off, where taxes are automatic, where savings can be frozen, where financial freedom becomes software. And here's the twist. In private briefings, billionaires are being warned that when the reset begins, currencies around the world could revalue overnight. Not collapse. Revalue. That means what you think is worth $10,000 might suddenly be worth $5,000 or $1,000 or nothing. But here's where it gets truly alarming. The new system won't be built to protect the average person. It will be built to protect the system. And the only people ready for that world are the ones preparing right now. The rich aren't buying land and gold because they're scared. They're buying them because they want to be rulers in whatever world comes after the reset. They don't prepare for storms. They prepare for new seasons. And this new season already began. But here's the part almost nobody is ready for. The reset won't look like a crash. It will look like a solution. Governments never announce collapses. They announce rescues. And behind those rescues is where the real power shift happens. Because the moment the system begins to break, the same institutions that caused the crisis will present themselves as the only ones who can fix it. And ordinary people, confused, scared, drowning in inflation, will accept anything if it promises stability. That's how resets work. Not with explosions, but with signatures. And the first signature will come from the Federal Reserve. The moment markets start spiraling, the Fed will step in with a plan that sounds responsible, patriotic, necessary. They'll say something like, to restore stability, we must modernize the US financial system. But modernize is just a softer word for replace. And the replacement won't be the dollar, you know. It will be a programmable digital version of it, a currency built for total oversight, not because of conspiracy, but because of convenience. They'll say a digital dollar stops fraud. They'll say it speeds up payments. They'll say it protects you. But the rich already know the truth. Once money becomes code, whoever writes the code controls the world. And governments won't be the only ones writing it. The richest private companies in America, tech giants, payment processors, data monopolies, have quietly been working with central banks, sharing infrastructure, building digital rails, merging public money with private technology. It won't feel like a takeover. It'll feel like an upgrade. But behind the scenes, the rules of money will change forever. Imagine waking up one day and seeing a message saying, certain transactions are temporarily limited. Not because you did something wrong, but because the system did. Imagine your savings being adjusted for stability. Imagine taxes being deducted in real time. Imagine loan approvals based not on your income, but on your compliance. And here's the twist no one sees coming. During every currency reset in history, the people who lose the most are the ones holding cash. The people who win are the ones holding control. That's why billionaires are building parallel systems. They're creating their own currencies, crypto reserves, gold vaults, commodities portfolios. They're building their own bank offices, private lending networks, offshore trusts. They're creating their own borders, private passports, dual citizenship, global mobility plans. They're preparing for a world where money changes shape overnight. And they're preparing for the chaos that comes right before the change. Because the truth is, resets don't happen peacefully. Before every major financial transformation, three things occur. Markets break, governments panic, and the public turns on itself. We're starting to see all three. Markets are cracking under high interest rates. Governments are drowning in debt. And the public is more divided than ever politically, culturally, economically. That division isn't random. It's the smoke before the reset. And billionaires know that when ordinary people are distracted, angry, and fighting among themselves, no one notices the power shift happening in the background. But here's the part that should scare you the most. This isn't just a financial reset. It's a geopolitical one. The world is split into two camps, one led by the United States with the dollar at the center, and the other led by rising powers building alternatives. China and Russia are creating new currency systems. The Middle East is moving oil trades away from the dollar. Europe is developing its own digital currency framework. Every nation is preparing for a world where the US is no longer the unquestioned financial leader. And when global power shifts, wealth shifts with it. That's why the rich aren't watching the news, they're watching exit strategies, they're studying historical cycles, they're moving their assets like chess pieces slowly, quietly, strategically, because they know what comes next. When the old system can no longer support itself, the new one doesn't arrive gently. It breaks through, it forces its way in. And when it does, those who prepared early rise to the top. Those who didn't get reset. But here's the real twist: the part your competitor would reveal in the final 10 seconds. The reset has already started. Not next year. Not in 2025. Not in 2026. It began the moment INFLATION broke the global system in 2021. Continued when the world hit the highest debt in human history. It deepened when countries started abandoning the dollar. It accelerated when billionaires began buying land, metals, and energy instead of stocks. And the final phase begins when the public finally realizes they weren't told the truth, not because the truth was hidden, but because the truth was too big to understand. So here's the question you have to ask yourself. When the world resets, will you be holding money, or will you be holding power? Billionaires already made their choice, and they're hoping you never make yours.